I cannot take the noise anymore. I am leaving my husband, Marcus announced, zipping his suitcase and abandoning our 1-month-old twins. He thought a month-long European getaway with his mistress on my dime was the perfect escape from fatherhood. But when he finally returned home to a locked door, a sold house and federal agents waiting in the driveway, he fell to his knees screaming that he had lost everything. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to teach a narcissist a lesson they will never forget. The piercing wails of our 1-month-old twins Leo and Mia echoed against the living room walls. I stood in the doorway holding a stained burp cloth, my hair tied in a messy knot, exhausted beyond belief. Marcus stood by the hallway mirror, ignoring the cries completely. He sprayed 2 heavy pumps of expensive cologne and adjusted the collar of his custom linen shirt. "Are you seriously walking out right now?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mix of fatigue and rage. "It is 8 at night and they both have colic." He did not even look at the bassinet. "I am going to Milan," he replied smoothly, grabbing his passport from the console table. "The guys and I planned this trip months ago. I need a break, Chiara. I am the vice president of sales. I bring in the money. I cannot be expected to perform at a high level when I am running on 3 hours of sleep because you cannot get your kids to quiet down." Your kids. The words felt like a physical slap across my face. "They are our kids, Marcus," I said, stepping closer to him. "And you did not plan this months ago. I checked the joint account this morning to pay the pediatrician bill. $15,000 is gone. You drained our entire savings." Marcus smirked. It was a patronizing expression that made my blood run cold. He checked his luxury watch, a gift I bought him when he got his promotion. "Consider it my survival bonus," he said. "I put up with 9 months of your mood swings, the swollen ankles, and the complaining. Now you are on maternity leave doing absolutely nothing all day. Motherhood is a natural instinct for a woman. You will figure it out. My ride is outside." He did not kiss me goodbye. He did not look at our son or our daughter. He simply grabbed the handle of his silver suitcase and walked out the front door. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind him, the sound vibrating through the floorboards. I did not collapse. I did not slide down the wall and weep. That was not who I was. Before I became a mother, I was a senior forensic accountant for one of the largest corporate auditing firms in Atlanta. My entire career was built on finding the invisible threads that liars tried to bury. I tracked missing millions for a living. I walked over to the bassinet, gently rocking it with one hand while I pulled my phone from my sweatpants pocket. As if on cue, a notification lit up the screen. It was not a text from Marcus apologizing. It was an automated fraud alert from my personal credit card, the one Marcus was supposed to be removed from a year ago. Charge alert. Air France $8,450. My brow furrowed. First, he drained $15,000 from the joint account. Now he was putting over $8,000 on my personal credit card. But what caught my forensic eye was not the dollar amount. It was the math. A last-minute first-class ticket to Milan did not cost $8,450. That was the price of 2 tickets. "Who are you flying with, Marcus?" I whispered to the empty room. I scooped up Mia, who had finally exhausted herself into quiet hiccups, and strapped her to my chest in the baby carrier. I picked up Leo, balancing him on my hip, and marched straight to my home office. The glow of my 3 computer monitors illuminated the dark room. It took me exactly 4 minutes to bypass the shared passwords he thought I did not know. I logged into the airline passenger portal. There it was plain as day. 2 seats in first class, Marcus Davis and Chloe Jenkins, his 22-year-old marketing assistant. A sharp, bitter laugh escaped my lips. He was not fleeing the noise of his children to find peace with his friends. He was running off on a European escapade on my dime. I clicked on the loan documents tab, my fingers flying across the keyboard with muscle memory. My eyes scanned the digital file, searching for the final page. There it was. a perfectly forged signature of my name dated exactly 1 month ago. That was the exact day I was in the hospital, enduring a grueling 22-hour labor to bring his children into the world. But a forged signature on a bank document meant nothing without a legal witness. I zoomed in on the bottom right corner of the screen. A crisp black notary stamp sat perfectly aligned next to my fake signature. Chelsea Davis, Notary Public State of Georgia. My breath caught in my throat. Chelsea was Marcus' sister-in-law, married to his older brother. She was a high-end real estate broker, and apparently a willing accomplice to federal wire fraud. She had used her official state seal to verify that I was standing right in front of her, signing away the equity of my home, while I was actually strapped to a hospital bed screaming in agony. This was not just a cheating husband taking a joyride. This was a coordinated family attack to rob me blind. I closed the laptop as the first rays of morning sunlight began to creep through the office blinds. I had not slept a single minute. The twins were finally resting quietly in their double bassinet. I walked into the kitchen to make a pot of coffee, my mind running through penal codes and federal sentencing guidelines. Just as the coffee machine began to brew, I heard the distinct sound of a key turning in the front door lock. Marcus had not left his key on the counter. He had given it to his mother. The door swung open, and in walked Brenda, my mother-in-law, followed closely by Chelsea. Brenda was already wearing her Sunday church outfit. She carried a designer handbag and an expression of profound disappointment. Chelsea trailed behind her, holding an iced matcha latte, looking pristine in her matching tennis skirt and crisp white polo. "Well, look at this place," Brenda announced, her voice booming through the quiet house. "Marcus told me you were letting things go, but this is an absolute disaster, Kiara. You have baby bottles sitting in the sink and the floors have not been vacuumed. No wonder my son had to leave the country just to get some peace of mind." I stood frozen by the coffee maker. "He abandoned his newborn children, Brenda," I said, keeping my voice dangerously level. Chelsea sighed, taking a loud sip of her matcha. "Oh, Kiara, do not be so incredibly dramatic," she said, waving her manicured hand. "Men like Marcus operate under immense pressure. He is a provider. He needs a sanctuary, not a stressful environment. You really should have made more of an effort to bounce back after the pregnancy. You are still wearing maternity clothes, for goodness sake. It is all about maintaining the romance and keeping him happy." I stared at Chelsea. The woman who had illegally notarized away $200,000 of my money was standing in my kitchen giving me unsolicited marriage advice. I felt a cold smile slowly forming on my face. I did not scream. I did not throw my coffee mug at her perfectly highlighted hair. A forensic accountant never tips her hand before the audit is complete. "I suppose you are right, Chelsea," I replied, my voice dripping with false submission. "It has just been a very difficult adjustment for me." Brenda huffed and walked over to the kitchen island. She opened her oversized leather handbag and pulled out a thick stack of mail wrapped in a thick rubber band. She dropped it onto the marble counter with a heavy thud. "Marcus had these forwarded to my house before he left," Brenda said. "They are his credit card bills from the last 2 months. He mentioned that since you are on maternity leave and not contributing to the household income right now, you need to pay these from your personal savings. It is the absolute least you can do while he is away securing your financial future." I walked over to the island and picked up the stack of envelopes. I slid the rubber band off and opened the first statement. It was a bill for a diamond tennis bracelet purchased at a luxury jeweler downtown. The second was a receipt for a private dinner cruise. Neither of those expensive things had been for me. "You want me to pay for his mistress?" I asked, looking directly into Brenda's cold eyes. Brenda did not even flinch. She adjusted her expensive outfit and crossed her arms. "I do not know what paranoid delusions you are fabricating in that tired brain of yours, Kiara. Marcus is on a business trip. You are his wife and you will support him or there will be severe consequences." Severe consequences. I repeated the words slowly, letting them hang in the air. I looked at Brenda and then at Chelsea, who was busy adjusting her diamond tennis bracelet. I knew exactly what they were trying to do. They were trying to bully a sleep-deprived mother into funding a European vacation for her cheating husband. But I was not a victim. I was a forensic accountant, and they had just handed me all the evidence I needed to destroy them. "You are right, Brenda," I said, softening my voice and looking down at the marble counter. "I am just so overwhelmed with the twins. Everything is so confusing right now. Actually, since you are both here, maybe you could help me understand something else. I received a strange email from the bank this morning about the house." Chelsea stopped adjusting her bracelet. Her eyes darted toward me. "What kind of email?" she asked, her voice suddenly an octave higher. I walked over to my laptop, pretending to look confused. "It says something about a home equity line of credit," said, reading the screen. $200,000. "I do not understand. This house is fully paid off. My parents left it to me. I never signed any papers for a loan. Did Marcus mention anything to you about this?" Chelsea gripped her iced matcha latte so tightly her knuckles turned white. A drop of green liquid spilled over the edge and landed on her pristine tennis skirt. "Oh, damn it!" she hissed aggressively, wiping at the stain. Brenda stepped forward, positioning herself between me and Chelsea. "That is business talk, Kiara," Brenda said sharply. "Marcus is the head of this household. If he took out a loan against the house, it is because he is making investments for your future. You do not need to worry your head about complicated financial matters. That is a man job. Just focus on losing the baby weight and taking care of my grandchildren." "But the bank document says I signed it," I pressed, keeping my expression perfectly innocent. "It even has a notary stamp on it. I was in the hospital having a surgery a month ago. How could I have signed a legal document in front of a notary?" Chelsea practically choked on her own saliva. She slammed her iced matcha latte down on the kitchen island. "Listen, Kiara, I have a very busy schedule today," she snapped, grabbing her designer purse. "I do not have time to sit here and listen to you interrogate us about things you clearly do not understand. Marcus will explain it all when he gets back. Until then, you need to pay those credit card bills like Brenda asked." "Do not be ungrateful." Brenda nodded in agreement. "We are leaving now," Brenda announced. "Have the house clean by the time we come back on Sunday after church, and pay those bills." They marched out of the kitchen, their heels clicking aggressively against the hardwood floors. The front door slammed shut for the second time in less than 12 hours. I stood alone in the quiet kitchen, listening to the silence. As soon as I heard Brenda start her luxury vehicle in the driveway, I dropped the confused housewife act. My posture straightened, and a cold, calculating smile spread across my face. I walked over to the kitchen island and picked up the plastic cup Chelsea had left behind. The iced matcha latte was still half full. A perfect set of her cherry red lipstick prints stained the rim. I grabbed a plastic Ziploc bag from the pantry, dropped the cup inside, and sealed it tight. I did not need her physical DNA, but a tangible piece of evidence linking her to my house. On the exact day I discovered the fraud, felt like a nice touch for the police report I was about to file. I marched back into my home office and sat down at my desk. It was time to go on the offensive. I opened a secure encrypted folder on my desktop and named it Project Ruin. I uploaded the forged loan documents, the flight receipts showing Marcus and his mistress, and the credit card bills Brenda had generously provided. They thought they had cornered a helpless, exhausted mother. They did not realize they had just walked straight into a trap set by a master auditor. I opened a new browser window and accessed the state government website. I navigated to the notary division and typed in her name. Her official commission number popped up, validating her active status. She committed a serious crime, and she was going to pay for every single mistake she had made against my family and my home. I was ready to destroy them all. I sat at my desk as the afternoon sun faded into evening. My eyes were glued to the 3 monitors illuminating the dark office. The twins were asleep in the nursery, and the house was perfectly silent. I had the forged loan documents open on my left screen and the bank transfer history on my right. $200,000 does not just vanish into thin air. Money always leaves a trail, and I was the best bloodhound in the business. Marcus thought he could outsmart me because I was on maternity leave. He assumed the sleep deprivation would make me blind to his financial crimes. He was terribly wrong. I cracked my knuckles and began running the routing numbers through my forensic auditing software. The initial line of credit was dispersed into a joint checking account, but it only stayed there for 48 hours. From there, it was wired in 3 separate transactions to a limited liability company I had never heard of before. I typed the name of the shell company into the state business registry. The page loaded instantly, revealing the registered agent and the primary business address. A cold laugh escaped my lips. The address listed for the company was the exact same address as Chelsea Luxury Real Estate Brokerage. She was not just a corrupt notary public stamping fake signatures. She was actively helping my husband launder the stolen equity from my home. They had set up a fake property management firm to wash the money, making it look like legitimate real estate investments. It was a sophisticated operation for an amateur, but to a trained auditor, it was as obvious as a neon sign. I took screenshots of the corporate filings and added them to my encrypted folder. But I knew Marcus. He was greedy. If he had a mechanism to wash $200,000, he was definitely using it for other things. I decided to dig deeper into his employment records. Marcus was the vice president of sales for a major software firm. He had access to a massive corporate expense account and discretionary client funds. I opened a backdoor portal I occasionally used for corporate risk assessments and searched his vendor payment history. My jaw clenched as the numbers populated on the screen. Over the past 6 months, Marcus had approved over $300,000 in vendor payments to that exact same shell company managed by Chelsea. He was embezzling money directly from his employer and funneling it through his sister-in-law. No wonder he was so confident about taking a month-long vacation to Italy with his young mistress. He was funding his entire lavish lifestyle with stolen corporate funds and the equity of my childhood home. I downloaded the entire ledger, exporting every single fraudulent invoice he had submitted. The puzzle pieces were snapping together perfectly, but I needed to find out how Brenda fit into this criminal enterprise. My mother-in-law was too greedy to let Marcus and Chelsea orchestrate a $500,000 heist without getting a cut. I ran a secondary search on the shell company outgoing wire transfers. Sure enough, a consistent monthly payment labeled as consulting fees was being routed to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. I cross-referenced the account routing data with Brenda personal banking information that I had from when we helped her with taxes 2 years ago. It was a perfect match. Brenda was receiving $20,000 a month in untaxed stolen funds while sitting in the front pew of her church passing judgment on my housekeeping skills. She was committing federal tax evasion and international money laundering. I leaned back in my expensive leather chair, staring blankly at the massive mountain of digital evidence I had meticulously gathered in a single evening. My husband, my mother-in-law, and my sister-in-law were running a highly coordinated and incredibly illegal criminal syndicate right under my nose. They thought I was just a weak, exhausted pregnant woman they could easily manipulate, gaslight, and eventually discard without a fight. They severely mistook my quiet kindness for absolute stupidity. I picked up my phone and dialed the direct line of a ruthless real estate investor I knew from my corporate dealings. He answered on the second ring. I told him I had a fully paid-off colonial house in a prime neighborhood, and I was willing to sell it to him for cash at a 20% discount if we could close the deal in 10 days. He agreed immediately, asking no questions. I was going to sell the house right out from under Marcus, leaving him with a massive fraudulent debt and absolutely no asset to cover it. The financial trap was set. The financial trap was set. But the arrogance of my husband's family knew absolutely no bounds. Early the next morning, before the sun had fully risen, the front door rattled open again. I was sitting on the living room rug feeding Mia when Brenda and Chelsea marched into my house for the second time in 2 days. They did not knock. They simply invaded my space as if they owned it, which in their minds, thanks to the fraudulent loan, they probably thought they did. Brenda stood over me, casting a long shadow across the nursery rug. She had her arms crossed tightly over her chest, holding the same leather portfolio she carried to church meetings. Chelsea stood right behind her, wearing a tailored pastel suit, holding a designer coffee cup, and looking at me with pure disguised disgust. "I am not here to socialize, Kiara," Brenda announced, her voice sharp and demanding. "I came to collect the payment confirmation for Marcus' credit card bills. I told you yesterday to handle his expenses, and I expect you to be a dutiful wife. Have you transferred the funds from your savings account yet?" I carefully lifted Mia and placed her gently over my shoulder to burp her. "I have been busy with the babies, Brenda," I said, keeping my tone submissive and quiet. "They were up all night. I have not had a moment to log into the bank." Chelsea let out a loud, dramatic sigh and rolled her eyes. She took a slow sip of her coffee and looked me up and down. "Honestly, Kiara, you use those babies as an excuse for everything," Chelsea said, her voice dripping with condescension. "It is no wonder Marcus needed a vacation. Look at you. You are still wearing baggy sweatpants and your hair is a complete disaster. It takes 10 minutes to put on some makeup and look presentable. Women in our circle bounce back from pregnancy in weeks. You are just wallowing in laziness and expecting my brother-in-law to tolerate it." I bit the inside of my cheek hard enough to taste copper. Chelsea was a woman who spent half her day at the salon and the other half forging federal documents. Yet she had the audacity to stand in my living room and criticize my natural postpartum body. "Marcus appreciates a woman who takes pride in her appearance," Chelsea continued, pacing slowly around my living room. "He is a vice president, Kiara. He needs a wife who can stand beside him at corporate events, looking elegant and refined. Not someone who looks like they just rolled out of a dumpster. You really need to invest in a gym membership and perhaps a good stylist. It is just a friendly suggestion, of course. I would hate for Marcus to find his physical fulfillment elsewhere just because you gave up on yourself." I knew exactly where Marcus was finding his physical fulfillment. He was finding it with a 22-year-old assistant in Milan, paid for by the money Chelsea helped him steal from my home. But I swallowed the venom rising in my throat. I needed them to feel powerful. I needed them to believe I was completely broken. "I am doing my best, Chelsea," I whispered, staring at the floor. "Your best is clearly not good enough," Brenda snapped, stepping closer. "My son is working himself to the bone to provide for this family. The absolute least you can do is manage his financial obligations while he is away. I want those bills paid today, Kiara. If you do not have the confirmation receipts emailed to me by noon, I will personally call Marcus and tell him how disrespectful and ungrateful his wife is acting." "I will do it right now, Brenda," I said, standing up slowly. I walked over to my desk, pretending to be thoroughly intimidated by their threats. I opened my laptop and logged into my personal banking portal. I intentionally transferred $5,000 to Marcus' credit card account to cover his luxury purchases. It was a calculated sacrifice. Paying that bill with traceable funds from my personal account would serve as concrete proof for the IRS that I was being financially coerced while he was out of the country. It was another nail in their legal coffin. I printed the confirmation receipt and handed it to Brenda. She snatched the paper from my hand, her lips curling into a smug, satisfied smile. "See how simple that was?" Brenda said, slipping the receipt into her leather portfolio. "Submission is a virtue, Kiara. Remember your place in this family." Chelsea smirked, adjusting her designer handbag. "Try to wash your hair before we see you on Sunday," she added sweetly. "We are hosting a barbecue for the church community, and we cannot have you embarrassing the family looking like a homeless person." They turned and walked out the front door, leaving behind the lingering scent of expensive perfume and cheap malice. As soon as the lock clicked shut, I walked straight back to my computer. I picked up my phone and dialed the real estate investor I had spoken to the night before. "I have the paperwork ready," I told him, my voice steady and cold. "We are closing the sale on Friday morning. Bring the full amount in cash. Just let them completely drown." I hung up the phone with the investor feeling a surge of adrenaline. The sale was moving forward, but I needed to tighten the noose around Chelsea. She was the weakest link in their little criminal chain. Arrogant people are usually the easiest to break because they panic when their intelligence is questioned. I picked up my phone again and dialed the direct line to Chelsea Real Estate Brokerage. Her assistant answered and put me through. When Chelsea picked up, her voice was dripping with annoyance, as if my mere existence was a burden to her day. "Kiara, what is it now?" She sighed loudly into the receiver. "I just saw you an hour ago, and I am incredibly busy with high-end clients." I kept my voice light and slightly trembling, playing the perfect role of the confused and overwhelmed housewife. "I am so sorry to bother you at work, Chelsea," I said, "but I just got a very confusing call from my homeowner insurance company. They said my policy is being flagged because of a new lien on the property. They mentioned the home equity line of credit we talked about this morning." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. The background noise of her busy office seemed to vanish. "What did you tell them?" Chelsea demanded, her voice dropping an octave. "I told them I did not have the paperwork in front of me," I replied innocently. "But the insurance agent said they need a copy of the original loan agreement to verify the coverage limits. Since Marcus is in Europe and you are in real estate, I figured he might have left a copy of the documents with you, or at least a digital scan. Could you email it to me so I can forward it to the insurance company right away?" Chelsea let out a nervous laugh that sounded more like a choke. "Kiara, that is completely unnecessary," she stammered, her confident facade cracking instantly. "The bank handles the insurance updates automatically. You must have spoken to a confused customer service representative. Just ignore them. I will have Marcus call them when he gets back." "But they said they need to verify my signature and the notary stamp," I pushed gently, twisting the invisible knife deeper. "They said since my name is the only one on the original deed, the new loan requires a certified notary seal to be valid. You are a notary, right, Chelsea? Do you know how I can get a copy of that stamped page?" The silence on the phone was deafening. I could practically hear her heart hammering against her ribs through the receiver. When she finally spoke, her voice was shrill and completely unhinged. "Listen to me very carefully, Kiara," she snapped. "You need to stop meddling in financial affairs. You do not understand. That paperwork is locked away in a secure bank vault and it is highly confidential. You do not have the clearance to demand those documents from anyone. If you keep poking around and calling insurance companies, you are going to completely mess up the investments Marcus is trying to build for your family. I just want to make sure the house is insured, Chelsea," I said, letting a fake tearful waver enter my voice. "It is the house my parents left me." "It is Marcus' house now," she yelled, losing her temper entirely. "He is the man of the house and he makes the decisions. Do not call my office again with this ridiculous paranoia. Focus on your screaming babies and let the adults handle the real business." She slammed the phone down. The dial tone buzzed in my ear like a victory siren. I smiled and ended the call. She was terrified. Her aggressive defensiveness was the classic reaction of a white-collar criminal realizing the walls were closing in on them. By threatening me and claiming the documents were locked away, she had just confirmed that she knew exactly what was on them and was actively trying to conceal the forgery from me. I opened my laptop and typed out a detailed memo of our phone conversation, adding the exact time and duration of the call. In forensic accounting, every single interaction is potential evidence. I dragged the memo into the encrypted folder labeled Project Ruin, right next to her fake notary seal. My trap was fully set and Chelsea had just walked right into the center of it. The investor was bringing the cash on Friday. By the time my mother-in-law hosted her lavish church barbecue this weekend, the ground beneath their feet would be completely gone. I stood up from my desk and walked over to the window looking out at the neighborhood. I looked at the twins sleeping peacefully in their cribs. Daddy was enjoying his final days of freedom in Milan, and Aunt Chelsea was about to learn a very hard lesson about federal law and what happens when you underestimate a mother defending her children. I walked back to my desk. The digital evidence was safely secured in my encrypted folder, but I needed physical proof to guarantee the federal indictments would stick. I went into the kitchen to retrieve the plastic Ziploc bag containing the designer coffee cup Chelsea had left behind. The cherry red lipstick stain was still perfectly intact on the plastic lid. In corporate auditing, physical evidence linking a suspect to the scene is the ultimate trump card. Chelsea would undoubtedly try to claim she had not been to my house or that I was harassing her, but this cup contained her DNA and her fingerprints. I took a permanent marker and wrote the date, time, and location of retrieval on the outside of the bag. I placed it carefully into a padded shipping envelope. Next, I needed to solidify the forgery case. I sat back down in my leather office chair and opened a secure connection to the Georgia Superior Court Clerks Cooperative Authority website. This was the official database for every registered notary public in the state. I typed in the commission number printed on the fraudulent home equity loan documents. Chelsea Davis commission expiration date, November of next year. The system confirmed her active status, but I was looking for something much more specific. Under state law, a notary is required to maintain a sequential physical journal of every notarial act they perform. They must record the date, the type of document, the name of the signer, and most importantly, the physical signature of the person appearing before them. Since I was lying in a hospital bed giving birth on the exact day this loan was executed, I obviously did not sign her journal. That meant Chelsea either left the entry blank, completely invalidating the notary act, or she forged my signature a second time in her official state logbook. Either way, it was a direct violation of state law, but because the fraudulent loan was processed through a federally insured bank and the funds were wired across state lines to her shell company, the crime escalated dramatically. This was no longer just a local real estate dispute. It was a textbook violation of Title 18 United States Code Section 1343, better known as federal wire fraud. That carried a maximum penalty of 20 years in federal prison. I opened a new text document and began drafting the executive summary of my investigation. I structured it exactly like the forensic audit reports I prepared for federal prosecutors. I detailed the initial unauthorized withdrawal from the joint checking account. I mapped the exact timeline of the home equity line of credit being opened using my forged signature. I documented the electronic transfer of $200,000 to the fake Property Management Limited Liability Company registered to Chelsea. Finally, I included the offshore wire transfers proving Brenda was receiving stolen funds in the Cayman Islands. The sheer audacity of their plan was staggering. They had weaponized my pregnancy, assuming the exhaustion of motherhood would make me compliant and oblivious. They thought my sole focus would be changing diapers and crying over a husband who needed a break. They never considered that the analytical mind that made me a top-tier corporate auditor did not just shut down because I gave birth. In fact, the primal instinct to protect my children had only sharpened my focus. I printed the executive summary on thick, high-quality paper. I organized the supporting documents into separate labeled folders. Folder A contained the forged loan agreements and the state notary database printouts. Folder B held the wire transfer receipts and the shell company registration documents. Folder C contained the credit card statements proving Marcus was spending the embezzled corporate funds on luxury travel with his mistress. I placed all three folders into a heavy-duty legal binder. This binder was not just a collection of financial records. It was a loaded weapon aimed directly at the heart of their arrogant little family. I looked down at my phone. It was Thursday evening. The real estate investor was coming tomorrow morning to finalize the cash sale of the house. That would completely sever my financial ties to the property, leaving Marcus holding a massive fraudulent mortgage on a house he no longer owned. And then came Sunday. Brenda was hosting her lavish church barbecue, a public spectacle designed to show off her perfect family. It would be the absolute perfect stage for my final act. I closed the legal binder and locked it inside my fireproof floor safe. The twins began to stir in the nursery, signaling it was time for their evening feeding. I walked down the hall feeling a profound sense of calm. The storm was coming. After feeding the twins and settling them back to sleep, the adrenaline in my veins completely eradicated any desire for rest. The binder in my safe held enough evidence to initiate an investigation, but I wanted an absolute guaranteed conviction. I needed to understand why Marcus took exactly $200,000 from my house equity right now. He was already embezzling corporate funds, so why risk a federal wire fraud charge on his own home? There had to be a missing puzzle piece, a catalyst that forced his hand. I returned to my dark office and woke up my monitors. I needed to go deeper into his corporate network. Marcus worked for a mid-sized software firm that specialized in data security, ironically enough. Using his executive credentials, I bypassed the two-factor authentication by routing the verification request to my secondary device. I accessed the internal accounting server and pulled up the upcoming quarterly audit schedule. The dates jumped off the screen. His department was scheduled for a comprehensive external audit next Monday. I ran a comparative analysis between the shell company invoices he had approved and the actual corporate bank ledger. Suddenly, the math made perfect, terrifying sense. Over the past 6 months, Marcus had embezzled roughly $500,000 by paying Chelsea, fake property management company, for non-existent corporate retreat venues. But 2 weeks ago, his finance director flagged a $200,000 discrepancy in the vendor reconciliation report. The director demanded that Marcus provide the corresponding venue receipts or return the funds before the external auditors arrived. Marcus panicked. He did not have the receipts because the venues did not exist, and he had already spent the corporate money on designer clothes, luxury cars, and wooing his young marketing assistant. He needed $200,000 in clean, untraceable cash immediately to balance the corporate ledger and avoid being fired and arrested. He could not get a traditional bank loan because his debt-to-income ratio was a disaster. So he looked at the only pristine asset left in his life: my fully paid-off childhood home. He had Chelsea forge my signature and notarize the home equity line of credit. But here is the ultimate irony. Once the $200,000 hit his account, his raging narcissism took over completely. Instead of using the stolen home equity to pay back his company and save his prestigious job, he looked at the massive cash balance and decided he deserved a reward for his highly stressful life. He transferred a small portion to his mother's offshore account to keep her quiet, paid off a few immediate personal debts, and then used the rest to book a month-long first-class European vacation with his mistress. He abandoned his corporate mess entirely, assuming that by the time he returned from Italy, the audit would have somehow blown over, or he could manipulate the numbers from afar. I sat back in my chair staring at the glowing screens. He was not just an arrogant cheat. He was a colossal fool. He had doubled down on his crimes, leaving a blazing paper trail in both his personal and professional life. I decided to look closely at the young mistress, Chloe Jenkins. She was not just a clueless passenger on this fraudulent joyride. I opened the payroll database and searched her name. She was hired 6 months ago, right when the embezzlement started. Her official title was marketing assistant, but her compensation structure included a massive quarterly bonus tied directly to the shell company vendor accounts. Marcus was using her bank account to wash the smaller amounts of cash. She was fully complicit. Every time he approved a fake invoice, Chloe received a 10% kickback disguised as a performance bonus. She was 22 years old and already a willing accessory to corporate embezzlement and money laundering. I took a high-resolution screenshot of her employment contract, her bonus payout history, and the corresponding fake invoices. I added them to a new folder on my desktop named The Mistress. The digital clock on my monitor read 3 in the morning. I had successfully mapped every single cent: the $200,000 from my house, the $500,000 from the software firm, the offshore transfers to Brenda, and the kickbacks to Chloe. It was a perfectly enclosed ecosystem of pure greed. I reached for my encrypted hard drive and backed up every single file, database, and email log. I was no longer just a wronged wife filing for divorce. I was the architect of their absolute destruction. I powered down the monitors and watched the screens go black. Tomorrow I would finalize the cash sale of my house. The countdown had officially begun, and Marcus had absolutely no idea the guillotine was already falling. The next morning, I woke up before the sun even had a chance to rise. The twins were still sound asleep in their cribs, giving me a rare moment of absolute silence. I made a strong cup of black coffee and walked back into my home office. I had mapped out Marcus and Chelsea, but Brenda still needed more definition. My mother-in-law was an arrogant woman who hid behind her religion. She was the treasurer at her megachurch. It was a position she used to judge everyone around her while presenting herself as a pillar of moral perfection. But $20,000 a month flowing into a Cayman Islands bank account was anything but holy. I sat down at my desk and opened a new browser window. I needed to see exactly how Brenda was moving that offshore money without raising red flags with the Internal Revenue Service. Since I had done her taxes 2 years ago, I still remembered the answers to her security questions. Her maiden name, her first pet, and the street she grew up on. I bypassed her security firewall in less than a minute and gained full access to her primary checking account. I cross-referenced her personal ledger with the offshore wire transfers I had found the night before. I needed to understand the mechanics of her specific banking strategy. The truth I uncovered made my blood run completely cold. Brenda was not just passively receiving stolen money from Marcus. She was running a massive tax evasion and money laundering operation right through her church community. The offshore account in the Cayman Islands was registered under a fake religious charity name. She was taking the $20,000 a month from Marcus and depositing it into this fake charity. Then she was claiming those deposits as tax-deductible charitable contributions on her personal tax returns. The federal government was literally giving her tax refunds for donating stolen money to herself. But the web of family fraud went even deeper than that. I pulled up the financial records for the church charity fund that Brenda managed as treasurer. She was siphoning off thousands of dollars in weekly cash donations from the congregation and funneling them directly into the same Cayman Islands account. My husband was embezzling from a software firm. My sister-in-law was committing federal wire fraud and forging legal documents. And my holy mother-in-law was stealing donation money from her own church congregation. They were not just a toxic family, they were a highly organized criminal syndicate operating right out in the open under the guise of upper-class respectability and religious devotion. I leaned back in my chair and took a slow sip of my coffee. The sheer magnitude of their arrogance was breathtaking. They had treated me like a disposable incubator, all while running a criminal empire that could put them all in federal prison for decades. I opened a new file and began filling out Internal Revenue Service Form 211. That is the official application for the Whistleblower Reward Program. The federal government pays a massive percentage of the recovered funds to the person who exposes the tax fraud. By turning Brenda in, I was going to legally collect a massive bounty on her stolen wealth. I attached the offshore bank statements, the fake charity registration, and her fraudulent tax returns to the digital whistleblower application. I created a similar packet for the FBI detailing the church embezzlement scheme. The entire web of their family fraud was now perfectly laid bare and meticulously documented on my hard drive. Every single wire transfer, every forged signature, every fake invoice, and every stolen donation was neatly packaged and ready for federal prosecutors. I made sure to encrypt the files twice to ensure maximum data security before submitting them to the authorities. I heard a soft cry coming from the nursery. Mia was waking up, demanding her morning feeding. I closed the laptop and stood up from my desk. The corporate auditor was clocking out, and the mother was clocking back in. I walked down the hall feeling a deep sense of righteous vindication. Tomorrow, I would sell the house and secure the cash. But Sunday was the day I was truly looking forward to. Sunday was the day Brenda was hosting her lavish church barbecue to show off her perfect life to the exact same congregation she was actively robbing. It would be a true shame if someone decided to crash that barbecue and expose the devil hiding in the front pew. I smiled to myself, knowing their entire fake world was about to come crashing down in the most spectacular and public way possible. They were going to lose everything. Friday morning arrived with a heavy downpour of rain, but my mood was incredibly bright. I had packed the essential baby gear and my most important personal documents into several large boxes stacked neatly by the front door. At precisely 9 in the morning, a sleek black SUV pulled into my driveway. A tall man in a sharp gray suit stepped out holding a leather briefcase to shield his head from the rain. His name was Victor, and he was one of the most ruthless corporate real estate liquidators in the state of Georgia. Victor did not care about family memories or the sentimental value of a childhood home. He only cared about profit margins and acquiring prime real estate well below market value. I opened the door and ushered him inside, out of the rain. Victor wiped his shoes and immediately began scanning the living room architecture with a cold, calculating eye. He was the kind of buyer who thrived on other people experiencing financial distress. I had told him over the phone that I needed a rapid cash closing and was willing to surrender 20% of the equity to make it happen immediately. He walked through the dining room, running his hand along the original oak trim. He did not ask why a mother with newborn twins was liquidating her fully paid-off house on a random Friday morning. In his line of work, asking emotional questions only slowed down the transaction process. We took a brief tour of the property. I showed him the upgraded kitchen, the spacious backyard, and the newly renovated master bathroom. Marcus had insisted on that expensive bathroom renovation just last year, claiming it would increase our home value. It was highly amusing to know that his vanity project was now directly benefiting the very man buying the house out from under him. Victor nodded approvingly as we concluded the tour and walked back to the large marble island in the kitchen. He placed his heavy leather briefcase on the counter and clicked the brass locks open. "I have the closing documents prepared," he said, sliding a thick stack of papers toward me. "My title company ran a full background check on the property yesterday afternoon. The deed is entirely in your name, Kiara, just as you stated. There is a recently recorded home equity line of credit attached to the address, but since my company is purchasing the property with a direct cash wire to your private account, that secondary debt obligation will simply default to the individual who took out the loan. In this case, your husband." I smiled warmly at his thorough assessment. "That is exactly correct, Victor," I replied, picking up the heavy black pen he offered me. "The debt belongs solely to him. The physical property belongs to me, and now I am transferring it to you." I began signing my name on the designated lines, transferring the legal ownership of my childhood home over to his liquidation firm. I did not feel a single ounce of sadness. A house is only a home when it provides safety and security. This building had become the centerpiece of a massive federal fraud scheme perpetrated by the people who were supposed to be my family. Getting rid of it was like cutting out a cancerous tumor. I signed the final page and pushed the stack of documents back across the marble counter. Victor reviewed the signatures and then pulled a small tablet from his briefcase. He logged into his corporate banking portal and initiated the wire transfer. I watched his screen as the full cash value of the house minus his steep discount was routed directly into a secure new bank account I had opened solely under my name. My phone vibrated in my pocket a few seconds later. It was the confirmation text from my bank. The funds had cleared completely. I was now a very wealthy and highly liquid independent woman. Victor handed me a copy of the finalized contract. "I will have my crew here on Monday morning at 8 sharp to change every lock on the doors and begin the interior demolition," he said, packing his briefcase. "You have until Sunday night to remove whatever personal belongings you wish to keep. Anything left behind will be thrown into a commercial dumpster by noon on Monday." "That timeline works perfectly for me," I assured him, shaking his hand. "I will be completely gone by Sunday afternoon." Victor walked out into the rain and drove away in his black SUV. I stood in the quiet kitchen looking around at the walls. Marcus thought he had leveraged this house to fund his extravagant new life. He had absolutely no idea that he was now legally tied to a $200,000 fraudulent mortgage on a property owned by a ruthless corporation. When he returned from Milan, he would not just be locked out. He would be trespassing on an active demolition site. The trap was now fully operational, and it was time to get ready for the Sunday barbecue. I walked back into my home office, the thrill of the house sale still buzzing in my veins. The cash was securely sitting in my private account, but the real work was just beginning. I sat down at my desk and pulled the thick legal binder from my fireproof safe. It was time to finalize the whistleblower packets for the federal authorities. I started with my mother-in-law. Brenda thought her position at the church made her untouchable. I opened the digital portal for the Internal Revenue Service and began uploading the supporting documents for Form 211. I attached the bank statements, proving she was siphoning weekly cash donations from the congregation. I included the routing numbers for the offshore Cayman Islands account and the fraudulent tax returns where she claimed those stolen funds as charitable deductions. I wrote a concise executive summary, explaining exactly how she used the church as a front for her money laundering operation. I made sure to highlight the exact dates and dollar amounts, leaving absolutely no room for misinterpretation. The IRS does not play games with tax evasion or offer grace to people who steal from charities. Brenda was looking at a massive financial penalty and a very long federal prison sentence. Next, I turned my attention to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. This packet was much thicker, involving multiple federal crimes committed across state lines. I created a detailed timeline mapping Marcus and his embezzlement scheme. I included the fake vendor invoices. He approved the internal corporate ledgers I had downloaded, and the wire transfer receipts, sending $500,000 of stolen corporate funds to Chelsea, fake property management company. I attached the screenshot of his young mistress employment contract and the bonus payout history, proving she was receiving a 10% kickback for her silence. Then I added the absolute crown jewel of my investigation, the forged home equity line of credit. I uploaded the state notary registry, confirming Chelsea active commission status, alongside the fake signature she had stamped. While I was giving birth in the hospital, I included the tracking number for the physical Ziploc bag containing her DNA on the discarded coffee cup. I drafted a cover letter addressed directly to the White-Collar Crime Division detailing the wire fraud, the corporate embezzlement, and the deliberate forgery of federal loan documents. I printed physical copies of both packets, carefully placing the Internal Revenue Service documents into a thick manila envelope and sealing it tight. I did the same for the Federal Bureau of Investigation packet. I wrote the addresses of the regional field offices on the front of each envelope in neat block letters. As a forensic accountant, I knew exactly how to format these reports to bypass lower-level analysts and land directly on the desks of senior investigators. I had handed them a fully prosecuted case tied up with a neat little bow. All they had to do was execute the arrest warrants. I placed the two sealed envelopes into my leather tote bag. I planned to drop them off at the main post office on Saturday morning so they would be processed and waiting on the agents' desks first thing Monday morning. The exact same morning, the external auditors were scheduled to arrive at Marcus Software firm. The timing was an absolute masterpiece of destruction. With the legal traps fully armed, I shifted my focus back to my immediate physical reality. I had less than 48 hours to pack up my entire life and vacate the house. Before Victor demolition crew arrived with their sledgehammers, I walked into the nursery where the twins were quietly babbling in their cribs. I promised them a life free from toxic manipulation, and I was going to deliver exactly that. I started filling cardboard boxes with their clothes, their toys, and their blankets. I packed my own essential clothing and my professional work documents, leaving behind anything Marcus had ever bought. Me, he could keep the cheap jewelry and the empty promises. The house slowly began to echo as the rooms emptied out. It felt incredibly liberating to strip away the physical layers of my fake marriage. By Friday evening, the house was mostly bare. I ordered a pizza and sat on the living room floor, feeding the babies and enjoying the complete absence of my husband. Toxic family. I pulled my phone from my pocket to check the time and saw a new notification glowing brightly on the screen. It was an alert from a social media application. Marcus had just posted a new public picture. I tapped the screen and opened the application. It was time to see what the man who had stolen my house was doing with his stolen freedom. The photograph loaded on my screen in high definition. Marcus was standing on a cobblestone balcony overlooking the glowing Eiffel Tower in Paris. He had a crystal glass of champagne in one hand, and his other arm was wrapped tightly around the waist of his young assistant Chloe. She was wearing a designer silk dress that I recognized immediately because I had paid the credit card bill for it just 2 days ago. Marcus was wearing a tailored tuxedo, looking completely carefree and incredibly smug. The caption underneath the picture read, "Sometimes you have to leave the noise behind and reward yourself for all the hard work. Cheers to the good life and the people who truly understand how to live it." I stared at the screen, feeling a strange mix of absolute disgust and profound relief. A few weeks ago, seeing my husband flaunt his mistress on the internet would have broken me into a million tiny pieces. But right now, it simply served as the final confirmation that I was making the right decision. His caption was a direct insult aimed at me and our newborn twins. He was calling his own children noise and claiming his stolen wealth was the result of hard work. He was completely delusional. I took a high-resolution screenshot of the post and the caption. I emailed the image directly to the external auditing team at his software firm, with a short, anonymous note suggesting they verify how their vice president was funding his lavish European vacation. Then I walked back into my home office. I had planned to wait until Saturday morning to mail the physical binders, but looking at his arrogant face made me realize I did not want to wait another second. The physical copies were still going to the post office, but the federal agencies also operated secure digital intake portals for immediate submissions. I sat down at my desk and woke up the monitors one last time. I opened the encrypted files I had prepared earlier. I navigated to the Internal Revenue Service whistleblower website and filled out the online submission form for Brenda. I attached the bank statements, the tax returns, and the offshore routing numbers. The screen prompted me to verify the submission. I moved my mouse and clicked send. A green confirmation number flashed on the screen. Next, I opened the Federal Bureau of Investigation white-collar crime reporting portal. I filled out the detailed intake forms for Marcus and Chelsea. I uploaded the forged notary documents, the fake loan agreements, the corporate ledgers, and the DNA evidence tracking number. I typed a brief summary detailing the wire fraud and the corporate embezzlement scheme. I checked the box confirming that all the information provided was accurate to the best of my knowledge. I took a deep breath and clicked send. A second green confirmation screen appeared thanking me for my submission. The digital trap was officially sprung. The federal government now had everything they needed to tear his world apart piece by piece. I powered down the computer and disconnected the hard drives. I packed my laptop into my heavy leather tote bag right next to the thick manila envelopes containing the physical evidence binders. I walked through the empty house, turning off the lights in each room. The silence was no longer a sign of loneliness. It was a testament to my freedom. I went into the nursery and checked on the twins one last time before going to sleep. I slept better that night than I had in over a year. Saturday arrived with bright sunshine. I loaded the twins into my car along with the final boxes of our belongings. Before leaving, I drove straight to the main post office downtown. I carried the heavy manila envelopes inside and handed them directly to the postal clerk. I requested certified mail with signature confirmation, ensuring that the federal agents would physically receive the binders first thing Monday morning. I watched the clerk stamp the envelopes and toss them into the outgoing bin. The process was completely finalized. I drove us to a beautiful luxury penthouse I had rented on the exact opposite side of the city using my clean cash. It was perfectly secure and completely hidden from Marcus and his toxic family. I spent Saturday unpacking boxes and settling into our brand new life. My mind was already racing ahead to the events of the next day. Tomorrow, Brenda was hosting her lavish church barbecue. She was going to stand in front of her congregation pretending to be a saint while secretly stealing their money. Chelsea would be standing there showing off her fake wealth. I smiled as I arranged the nursery. I could not wait to attend that party. Sunday afternoon arrived with a heavy blanket of southern heat and the smell of smoked brisket filling the air. Brenda lived in a sprawling estate in a gated community manicured to project success. Her backyard was transformed into a lavish outdoor banquet space for the church congregation. White tents shaded rows of tables covered in expensive linens. A live jazz band played softly in the corner, while women in elaborate church hats and men in tailored summer suits mingled on the pristine lawn. Brenda was in her element. She stood near the center of the patio, holding a glass of iced sweet tea, greeting the church elders with her practiced holy smile. She played the generous, devoted treasurer flawlessly. Chelsea stood a few feet away, wearing a designer sundress, holding court with a group of younger wives, bragging about her latest real estate listings. I parked a rental car a block away and walked toward the gates. I did not look like the exhausted postpartum mother they had bullied in my kitchen just a few weeks ago. I had spent the morning at a high-end salon. My hair was blown out perfectly straight, and my makeup was sharp and flawless. I wore a tailored emerald green jumpsuit that cinched at my waist, paired with nude designer heels that clicked sharply against the pavement. I looked like a senior corporate executive arriving at a hostile takeover. Which was exactly what I was doing. I did not bring the twins. They were safely back at the secure penthouse being watched by a highly recommended professional nanny I had hired with my newly acquired cash. Today was not a day for children. Today was a day for absolute destruction, and I needed my hands completely free. Walking beside me was a tall man wearing a sharp navy blue suit, carrying a slim leather briefcase. His name was David, and he was one of the most ruthless litigation attorneys in the city. I had retained his services on Friday, right after selling the house. I needed legal counsel present to witness the fallout and ensure my rights were completely protected when the authorities eventually arrived. As David and I walked through the side gate into the backyard, the ambient chatter of the party began to die down. Heads turned in our direction. The congregation knew who I was. I was the quiet daughter-in-law who never quite fit into their elite social circles. They expected me to look defeated and overwhelmed, especially with Marcus away on business. Seeing me stride onto the lawn looking like a millionaire with a corporate lawyer by my side sent a visible shockwave through the crowd. Brenda was mid-sentence talking to the head pastor when she finally saw me. Her jaw physically dropped, and the sweet church lady smile completely vanished from her face. She blinked rapidly, her eyes darting over my expensive outfit and the confident attorney standing next to me. A few feet away, Chelsea stopped laughing. She lowered her drink and stared at me with pure, unadulterated confusion. I did not wait for them to approach me. I walked straight across the lawn toward the center patio, the crowd parting instinctively to let me through. David stayed one step behind me, observing the scene with a detached silence. "Kiara," Brenda said, her voice tight and forced. She quickly plastered a fake smile back onto her face for the sake of the pastor standing nearby. "We were not expecting you today. Marcus said you were too overwhelmed with the babies to attend public events." I smiled, a cold, calculating expression that did not reach my eyes. "I was feeling a bit overwhelmed, Brenda," I replied, my voice loud and clear, carrying over the soft jazz music. But then I realized that staying hidden in the shadows is exactly what dishonest people want you to do. I decided it was time to step into the light and join the celebration. Chelsea marched over her heels, sinking into the grass. She looked me up and down, her face twisting into a sneer. "Who is this?" she demanded, pointing a manicured finger at David. "Did you hire a bodyguard, Kiara? Are you desperate for attention?" "This is my attorney, Chelsea," I said calmly, turning my gaze directly to her. "I brought him along because we have some very serious real estate matters to discuss, specifically regarding a certain home equity line of credit and a fraudulent notary stamp." Chelsea's face lost absolutely all of its color instantly. She took a step back, her designer handbag slipping slightly off her shoulder. The confident real estate broker vanished, replaced by a terrified criminal, realizing she had been completely caught by the one woman she thought she could easily break. Chelsea recovered her composure quickly. She let out a loud, shrill laugh echoing across the lawn. The congregation stopped their conversations and turned their attention toward our confrontation. Chelsea knew she had an audience and was determined to use them to her advantage. She stepped forward, jutting her chin in the air to reclaim her superiority. "Are you seriously threatening me at a church barbecue, Kiara?" she asked, her voice carrying over the jazz music. "You bring some cheap lawyer here to try and scare us. We all know the truth. Marcus left for Europe because you were draining him dry. Now you come crashing our family event looking for a handout." Brenda nodded, stepping up beside her daughter-in-law. "It is true," Brenda announced to the crowd, her voice dripping with fake pity. "My son works himself into the ground to provide for her and those babies. He went to Milan to escape the financial stress she puts on him. Now she shows up here wearing a rented outfit to cause a scene. Kiara, you are embarrassing yourself. Go home before I have security escort you out." I did not flinch. I stood tall, my emerald green jumpsuit catching the afternoon sun. "I am not here for a handout, Brenda," I replied, my voice steady and calm. "I certainly do not need even a single penny of Marcus' stolen money anymore. In fact, I do not need anything from this toxic family ever again." "Oh, please," Chelsea scoffed, waving her hand dismissively, her confidence growing as the elders watched. "You do not have a dime without my brother-in-law. You have been sitting at home in sweatpants crying over bills you cannot pay. I saw the credit card statements myself. You are completely broke, Kiara. What are you going to do? Sue us for emotional distress because your husband realized he married a gold digger. You do not even own the roof over your head. Marcus handles the real estate assets. He makes the financial decisions. You are just a dependent wife." The crowd murmured in shock. Chelsea thought she was destroying my reputation in front of the church, but she was confessing to her own arrogance. She publicly confirmed her belief that Marcus controlled my property and that I was powerless. I turned to my attorney, David. He opened his leather briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "Actually, Mrs. Davis," David said, speaking for the first time, his voice deep and authoritative, "my client is entirely financially independent. As of yesterday morning, she liquidated her solely owned real estate assets for a very substantial cash sum. She is completely debt-free and heavily capitalized." Chelsea narrowed her eyes, her face flushing red. "What are you talking about?" she snapped, stepping closer to David. "That house is heavily leveraged. Marcus took out a $200,000 loan against it. You cannot just sell a house with a massive lien on it without paying the bank back. Who do you think you are fooling with these fake documents?" I smiled, letting her aggressive words hang in the heavy southern air. She had just admitted in front of dozens of witnesses that she knew about the loan. A loan I had supposedly signed in her very presence. "That is fascinating, Chelsea," I said, tilting my head. "Because according to the official bank documents, I am the one who signed for that home equity line of credit. I supposedly stood right in front of you and signed the paperwork while you stamped it with your official state notary seal? So why are you telling everyone here that Marcus took out the loan?" Chelsea froze completely. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. The realization of what she had just said hit her like a physical blow to the stomach. She had publicly contradicted the very legal document she had illegally forged. The church elders were watching her closely now, their expressions shifting from mild amusement to deep concern. Brenda tried to intervene, sensing that Chelsea was rapidly drowning. "That is enough of this nonsense," Brenda yelled, waving her arms frantically at the jazz band to play louder. "We are celebrating today. I will not have my family slandered by a bitter, jealous woman." I ignored Brenda, keeping my eyes locked on Chelsea. "You see, Chelsea?" I continued, my voice slicing through the noise like a razor blade. "When a property is sold for cash, the secondary debt defaults to the person who originated the loan. Since I did not sign that paperwork, the bank has transferred that massive debt entirely to Marcus. And the state of Georgia is very interested in asking you exactly how your official state seal ended up on a forged document. The jazz band abruptly stopped. The silence that blanketed the backyard was absolute and heavy. Chelsea stumbled backward. She looked frantically at the church elders, who were now staring at her with profound shock and suspicion. I stepped closer, closing the distance between us. David stood still beside me, holding his leather briefcase like a weapon. You stamped that home equity line of credit on the exact same afternoon I was strapped to a hospital bed delivering my twins, I said, my voice projecting clearly across the silent lawn. I have the admission records, the delivery logs, and the timestamps. Unless you can physically be in two different places at once, you committed a severe felony. Chelsea opened her mouth to speak, but only a pathetic squeak came out. Her carefully constructed facade of superiority was disintegrating right in front of my eyes. Her hands began to shake so violently that the ice cubes in her drink rattled against the glass. It was a mistake, she finally stammered, her voice barely a whisper. A clerical error. Kiara, I stamp dozens of real estate documents every single day. Marcus brought me the paperwork and said you had already signed it. I just verified his signature. I did not know yours was forged. You have to believe me. I laughed, a cold, harsh sound that echoed across the perfectly manicured lawn. A clerical error, I repeated slowly, letting the words sink in. That is a very creative defense, Chelsea. But it does not explain the wire transfers. Chelsea dropped her glass. It shattered against the stone patio, spilling sweet tea and ice everywhere. She did not even look down. Her eyes were locked on my face, wide with absolute terror. You see, I am a forensic accountant, I explained, pacing slowly in front of her. I track missing millions for large corporations. Finding $200,000 stolen from my own home was like a basic math puzzle. I followed the money. Chelsea, I followed it right from the fraudulent bank loan directly into the business account of a fake property management company. A company registered under your name at your exact business address. Gasps erupted from the crowd of church members. The head pastor took a step back, putting physical distance between himself and Brenda family. You did not just make a clerical mistake. Chelsea, I continued, my voice rising with authority. You conspired with my husband to steal the equity from my childhood home. You forged my signature, stamped it with your official state seal, and then actively laundered the stolen funds through a shell corporation to hide the theft. That is not a simple misunderstanding. That is federal wire fraud and money laundering. And the penalty for that under federal law is up to 20 years in prison. Brenda lunged forward, grabbing my arm. Her nails dug into my green jumpsuit. You shut your lying mouth right now, Kiara. Brenda hissed, her face contorted in pure rage. I will not let you stand in my backyard and ruin my family name with these psychotic accusations. My son is a highly respected vice president. Chelsea is a top-tier real estate broker. You are nothing but a jealous, bitter little girl trying to extort us because Marcus finally realized he deserved a better woman. I looked down at Brenda, hand gripping my arm. I did not pull away. I simply turned my head and looked her dead in the eyes. I would be very careful about who you call a criminal. Brenda, I whispered, my voice dropping to a dangerous register, so only she and Chelsea could hear the next part clearly. Because Marcus is not a respected vice president anymore. He is an embezzler who stole $500,000 from his employer to pay for his young mistress. And you are not a holy woman. You are a thief who uses a fake charity in the Cayman Islands to steal from the very people standing in your backyard right now. Brenda's face turned completely ashen. Her hand went entirely numb and slipped off my arm. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish, suffocating on dry land. The righteous church treasurer had just realized that her own dark secrets were no longer hidden in the shadows. David stepped forward and unlatched his briefcase. He pulled out a thick manila folder and held it out toward Chelsea. These are the copies of the forged documents, the bank transfers, and the shell company registration, my attorney stated calmly. I suggest you retain defense counsel immediately, because my client submitted the original evidence to the federal authorities yesterday morning. Chelsea let out a loud sobbing wail and sank to her knees right there on the stone patio. The sound of her crying was the only noise left in the sprawling backyard. The church elders who had just been laughing and enjoying their iced sweet tea were now backing away slowly. Nobody wanted to be standing close to a confessed felon when the consequences finally arrived. Brenda was still staring at me with her mouth open, unable to process the absolute destruction of her perfect social image. Her chest heaved up and down as she struggled to breathe through the sheer panic of being exposed. David stood firmly by my side, completely unfazed by the dramatic display. He simply closed his briefcase and checked his watch. Right on time, he murmured softly. I looked toward the heavy iron gates at the side of the property. The sound of tires crunching aggressively against the gravel driveway echoed through the quiet afternoon air. 3 dark, unmarked sport utility vehicles pulled up in a coordinated formation, blocking the entire entrance to the estate. The doors opened simultaneously, and 6 individuals stepped out into the bright afternoon sun. They were not wearing police uniforms, but their attire was unmistakable. They wore sharp tactical trousers, dark sunglasses, and navy blue windbreakers with bold yellow letters printed across the back. 4 of them had FBI written across their jackets, while the other 2 displayed the letters IRS. The church congregation parted like the Red Sea as the federal agents marched directly onto the pristine lawn. They moved with absolute authority, their hands resting casually near the dark holsters at their waistlines. The lead agent, a tall man with silver hair and a stern expression, bypassed the buffet tables and walked straight toward the patio where we were standing. He pulled a leather badge holder from his pocket and held it up for everyone to see. I am Special Agent Miller with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, he announced, his voice booming with unquestionable authority. We are looking for Chelsea Davis and Brenda Davis. Brenda let out a terrified shriek and pressed her back against the brick wall of her massive house. She looked around wildly as if expecting one of the church elders to step forward and protect her. But the head pastor simply turned his back and walked away, signaling to his flock that they should not interfere with a federal investigation. I am Brenda, she whispered, her voice cracking with fear. But there must be some mistake, officer. I am a respectable woman. I am the treasurer of my church. Agent Miller signaled to the 2 agents from the Internal Revenue Service. They stepped forward, holding thick folders that looked remarkably similar to the ones I had mailed the day before. There is no mistake, ma'am, Agent Miller replied coldly. We have federal warrants for your arrest and for the search of these premises. You are being charged with federal tax evasion, money laundering, and the embezzlement of charitable funds. We have already frozen all of your domestic accounts and are actively working with international authorities to seize your offshore assets in the Cayman Islands. Brenda's legs gave out completely. She slid down the brick wall and landed on the patio, clutching her chest as she began to hyperventilate. The 2 IRS agents stepped forward and firmly instructed her to stand up. When she refused, they simply grabbed her by the arms and hauled her to her feet, pulling her hands behind her back. The sharp metallic click of handcuffs snapping shut echoed loudly across the patio. Chelsea was still on her knees, crying hysterically into her hands. 2 FBI agents walked over and stood directly above her. Chelsea Davis, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud and the forgery of official state documents, Agent Miller stated, reading from a formal document. You have the right to remain silent, and I highly suggest you use it right now. Please. Chelsea begged, looking up at the agents with mascara running down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. It was my brother-in-law, Marcus. He made me do it. He forced me to stamp the paperwork. I did not want to steal her house. Agent Miller looked down at her with absolutely zero sympathy. You can explain your family dynamics to the federal judge on Monday morning, he said. Stand up and put your hands behind your back. The congregation watched in stunned silence as the two supposedly perfect women of their church were restrained like common criminals. Their designer dresses and expensive jewelry looked entirely ridiculous paired with heavy steel handcuffs. I watched them cry and beg, but I felt absolutely no pity. They had tried to ruin my life and steal my children's future just to fund their own arrogant greed. This was not a tragedy. It was pure justice. Agent Miller signaled to his team, and the two agents flanking Chelsea pulled her to her feet. Her designer sundress was wrinkled and heavily stained with spilled sweet tea. She looked frantically into the crowd of church members searching the faces for her husband. He had been standing near the barbecue grill just moments before holding a plate of ribs, but now he was nowhere to be found. He had completely abandoned her the exact second the federal windbreakers appeared on his mother lawn. He knew his wife was guilty and he was not going to sink with her ship. David, my attorney, stood calmly by my side watching the scene unfold with professional detachment. He adjusted his suit jacket, observing the destruction of the family with a clinical eye. "You cannot do this to me!" Chelsea screamed as the agents began walking her toward the dark, unmarked vehicles parked in the driveway. "I am a licensed real estate broker in the state of Georgia. I have high-end corporate clients. You are making a mistake. This is going to completely ruin my professional career and my reputation." "Your career is over," Mrs. Davis Agent Miller replied, not even breaking his confident stride. "The State Real Estate Licensing Board has already been formally notified of your federal wire fraud charges. Your notary public commission and your broker license were permanently suspended an hour ago. You will never sell another house again." Chelsea let out a guttural, sobbing wail that echoed across the affluent neighborhood. She was loaded into the back of a dark sport utility vehicle, and the heavy metal door was slammed shut, securing her fate. Back on the stone patio, Brenda was still sitting on the ground, hyperventilating violently into her chest. The two Internal Revenue Service agents were loudly reading her the details of the federal asset seizure. "Everything is gone," Brenda moaned, rocking back and forth, clutching her chest. "You cannot take my checking accounts. I have luxury car notes to pay. I have a massive mortgage on this estate. Ma'am, your domestic checking and savings accounts have been frozen by federal order." The female IRS agent stated, her voice strictly business and devoid of any empathy. "Your credit cards have been canceled and your offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands are currently being seized by international banking authorities. Furthermore, this entire property is now considered an active crime scene as we execute a search warrant for financial documents related to your fraudulent tax-exempt charity." At the mention of the fraudulent charity, the head pastor stepped forward from the crowd, his face a mask of absolute panic. The other church elders began scattering like roaches, running toward the exits to avoid being associated with the raid. "Excuse me, federal agent," the pastor said, holding his hands up defensively. "Our church congregation had absolutely no knowledge of Brenda Davis conducting illicit activities. We are a holy house of worship. We are completely innocent in this terrible matter." The female agent turned to the pastor and handed him a sealed white legal envelope. "We will determine that during the forensic audit, sir," she said smoothly. "This is a federal subpoena for all of your church financial records spanning the last 5 years. We will be sending an investigative accounting team to your administrative offices tomorrow morning at 8 sharp. I highly suggest you cooperate fully, or you will be facing obstruction charges." The pastor looked at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. He turned his furious gaze down toward Brenda, who was weeping pitifully on the ground. "You have brought the devil into our sanctuary, Brenda." The pastor yelled, his voice shaking with unholy anger. "You are officially stripped of your title as treasurer, and you are permanently banished from our congregation." The murmurs of the remaining crowd turned into loud gasps and angry whispers. The people who had praised Brenda for years were now looking at her with pure disgust. The carefully constructed facade of her perfect elite family was completely shattered in front of her peers. She had absolutely nothing left. No stolen money, no fake social status, and no church community to manipulate. Agents began walking out of the massive house carrying heavy cardboard boxes filled with Brenda personal files, bank statements, and computer hard drives. The government raid was methodical, fast, and absolute. I looked at David and gave a small nod. Our work here was completely finished. We turned around and began walking back across the pristine lawn toward the side gate, leaving the wreckage behind. Kiara Brenda screamed, her voice tearing through the humid air. I stopped and looked back over my shoulder. Brenda was struggling against the agents, her face red and streaked with mascara. "You did this to us," she yelled aggressively. "You ruined my perfect family. Marcus is going to destroy you when he gets home from Milan. He is going to take those twin babies away from you and leave you on the street." I walked back toward her, stopping just a few feet away from where she sat in heavy steel handcuffs. "Marcus is not going to do anything, Brenda," I said, my voice dangerously calm and quiet. "Your son is currently a fugitive, wanted for $500,000 in corporate embezzlement. His luxury credit cards are funded by the very accounts the federal government just froze. By tonight he will not even be able to buy a bottle of water in Europe. And when he finally manages to crawl back to America, he will be stepping right into a federal prison cell right next to you in Chelsea." Brenda's eyes rolled back into her head, and she slumped forward against the stone patio, completely fainting from the sheer shock of the truth. I turned my back on the chaos and walked out of the heavy iron gates. The afternoon sun felt incredibly warm and liberating on my skin. The domestic cleanup was complete. Now it was time for the international fallout to begin. 6,000 miles away in Milan, Italy, Marcus was oblivious that his entire criminal empire had just been reduced to ashes. He was standing inside an exclusive designer boutique on the Via Monte Napoleone, enjoying the crisp air conditioning and complimentary champagne. Chloe stood in front of a mirror wearing a diamond tennis necklace that cost more than a luxury car. She turned to him, pouting her lips perfectly, and asked if she could keep it. Marcus smiled arrogantly and pulled out his black corporate credit card, handing it to the sales associate with a grand, sweeping gesture. The sales associate bowed slightly and carried the heavy metal card over to the register. Marcus took a slow sip of champagne, watching Chloe admire herself in the mirror. A moment later, the associate returned looking extremely uncomfortable. His professional smile was gone, replaced by a look of polite concern. "I am terribly sorry, sir," the associate said, keeping his voice low to avoid embarrassing Marcus. "But this card has been declined by the issuing institution." Marcus frowned, annoyed by the inconvenience. He assumed it was just a standard fraud alert triggered by an international purchase. "Run it again," he ordered, waving his hand dismissively. "Sometimes the chip reader malfunctions." The associate nodded and tried the transaction a second time. The machine beeped loudly, displaying the exact same red error message. "I apologize, sir, but it is completely declined," the associate confirmed, pushing the card back across the glass counter. "Do you perhaps have another form of payment we could use?" Marcus snatched the black card off the counter, his face flushing red with embarrassment. Chloe had stopped admiring the necklace and was now staring at him with a confused and slightly irritated expression. Marcus quickly opened his designer wallet and pulled out his personal platinum credit card, the one tied directly to the joint accounts he shared with his mother. He handed it over confidently. The associate ran the second card. A loud, sharp beep echoed through the quiet boutique. "Declined," the associate said, his tone growing slightly colder. "Sir, I must ask if you have cash or a functioning card, otherwise we will need to return the necklace to the display case immediately." Marcus felt a cold sweat break out on the back of his neck. This was impossible. He had hundreds of thousands of dollars in those accounts. He grabbed his cards and marched out of the boutique, dragging a disappointed Chloe behind him onto the busy Italian street. He pulled his phone from his pocket and immediately opened his banking application. A giant red banner covered the screen stating his accounts were locked due to suspected fraudulent activity and pending federal investigation. His heart began to hammer violently against his ribs. He refused to believe he had been caught. His narcissism immediately looked for a different scapegoat. He decided it was Kiara. He assumed she had failed to pay the credit card bills he left behind, or that she had maliciously called the bank to report his cards stolen out of spite. He opened his messaging application and began typing furiously. "What the hell did you do to my cards?" He texted, his thumbs hitting the screen so hard he almost cracked the glass. "I am standing in a store in Milan and everything is declined. Did you forget to pay the bills I told you to pay? Call the bank right now and fix this, Kiara. This is incredibly embarrassing. Do your job as a wife and get this sorted out immediately." Back in Atlanta, I was sitting on the plush velvet sofa in my new secure penthouse, holding Mia against my chest while she drank her afternoon bottle. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. I reached over and tapped the screen, reading the aggressive messages from Marcus. A wide, genuine smile spread across my face. I could vividly picture him standing on a street in Italy, panicking as his stolen financial foundation crumbled beneath his expensive leather shoes. My phone buzzed again. "Are you ignoring me?" he texted. "Answer me right now, Kiara. I swear to God, when I get back home, I am going to make you regret this." I did not reply. I simply locked the screen and set the phone back down on the table. The silence of my red receipts would drive him absolutely insane. I knew exactly what he would do next. He would try to call his mother to bail him out. He would call Chelsea to wire him cash from their fake company. But neither of those women were going to answer their phones because they were currently sitting in federal holding cells without bail. He was entirely alone, trapped in a foreign country with absolutely no money to his name. The reality of his isolation was the sweetest justice I could have ever engineered. I picked up Mia and rested her against my shoulder, looking out through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new living room. The penthouse was located on the 40th floor of a highly secure luxury building overlooking the Atlanta skyline. I had intentionally chosen this location for its strict security protocols. The building required biometric scanning just to enter the lobby. There was a 24-hour armed concierge service, and my unit could only be accessed via a private elevator that required a coded keycard. If Marcus somehow managed to drag himself back to the United States and discover my location, he would never even make it past the front desk. I had spent the last 48 hours transforming this massive open-concept space into a perfect sanctuary for my children. The nursery was painted a calming sage green, completely different from the sterile white room Marcus had demanded in our old house. I hired a professional nanny named Maria, a warm and experienced woman who took over the night shifts so I could finally catch up on my sleep. For the first time since the twins were born, I actually felt rested. The dark circles under my eyes were fading, and the constant knot of anxiety in my stomach had completely vanished. I was no longer a stressed, exhausted hostage in my own marriage. I was a wealthy, independent woman, fully in control of her destiny. My phone buzzed again on the glass coffee table, vibrating intensely against the surface. It was another barrage of text messages from Marcus. He was demanding that I call his mother and tell her to wire him $10,000 immediately. I almost laughed out loud at the tragic irony. He had no idea that Brenda was currently sitting in a federal holding facility, wearing an orange jumpsuit, completely unable to access even a single penny of her stolen wealth. I decided I had entertained his digital tantrums long enough. I opened my cellular provider application and permanently deactivated my phone number. I pulled the small physical SIM card out of the device and snapped it in half, throwing the pieces into the trash. I had already purchased a new encrypted phone for my attorney and the nanny to use. Marcus was now completely cut off. The next morning, I sat at my new marble kitchen island, drinking a hot cappuccino and reviewing my investment portfolio. The cash from the house sale was earning a substantial daily interest rate. I opened my laptop and checked my anonymous corporate email account. The message I had sent to the external auditors at Marcus' software firm had triggered a massive internal shockwave. A trusted former colleague from my corporate auditing days confidentially informed me that federal agents had raided the software company headquarters first thing Monday morning. They seized his corporate hard drives and formally interviewed the chief financial officer. By Tuesday afternoon, the company issued a widespread internal memo announcing the immediate termination of Marcus Davis and Chloe Jenkins, citing severe violations of corporate ethics and ongoing federal criminal investigations. His prestigious career, the vice president title he had constantly used to belittle me, was officially reduced to ashes. The corporate legal team was already drafting a civil lawsuit to recover the embezzled $500,000. I closed the laptop and took a deep breath. Everything was executing with absolute flawless precision. The federal government was handling the criminal prosecution. The corporation was handling the civil litigation. All I had to do was sit back in my luxurious fortress and watch the final act play out. The week passed quickly in a peaceful haze of baby giggles, warm bottles, and quiet evenings overlooking the glowing city lights. As Friday approached, my thoughts turned back to the old colonial house. Victor, the ruthless real estate investor, had officially taken legal possession of the property on Monday. I knew exactly what his demolition crews were doing to the place. They were gutting the custom kitchen Marcus loved so much and tearing down the walls. I looked at the calendar. It had been exactly 4 weeks since Marcus walked out the front door complaining about the noise of his own children. His month of freedom was officially over. He was out of money, out of options, and forced to find a way home. While Marcus was scrambling to find a way across the Atlantic Ocean, my former neighborhood was experiencing a massive disruption. Victor was a man of his word, and his demolition crew had descended upon the colonial house like a swarm of locusts. I drove past the property on Wednesday afternoon just to observe the progress from a safe distance. The site was absolutely magnificent. A massive industrial dumpster sat right in the middle of the pristine driveway. The custom oak front door had been completely ripped off its hinges and replaced with a cheap sheet of plywood secured by a heavy steel padlock. The manicured lawn Brenda used to obsess over was now destroyed by the heavy tread of construction vehicles and muddy work boots. The crew had already gutted the interior walls, transforming the once elegant family home into a hollowed-out wooden skeleton. The luxurious master bathroom Marcus had bragged about to all his corporate friends was nothing more than a pile of shattered porcelain and twisted copper pipes resting at the bottom of the dumpster. The house no longer existed as a home. It was simply an active construction site, legally owned by a ruthless corporate entity that cared absolutely nothing about Marcus Davis or his fabricated life. But the demolition of his physical environment was only one part of his total financial ruin. Later that same afternoon, I received a phone call from the security guard who patrolled my former neighborhood. Since my name was still listed as a primary point of contact on the community registry, he was calling to inform me about a loud disturbance at the address. 2 large men driving a heavy-duty tow truck had just pulled up to the curb. They were not there for the construction debris. They were there for the silver Porsche Panamera parked in the street. Marcus loved that car more than he loved his own family. He washed it every single weekend and refused to let anyone else drive it. When he leased the vehicle 2 years ago, he used his corporate income to qualify, but he had quietly attached the monthly payments to the joint checking account I managed. When the federal agents froze his assets and I emptied the remaining legitimate funds into my private accounts, the car payment naturally bounced. The leasing company did not waste any time. The moment the account was flagged for federal fraud, they instantly dispatched a repossession agency to retrieve their asset. The neighborhood security guard watched in complete shock as the repo men expertly hooked the back wheels of the luxury sports car and dragged it onto the flatbed truck. They did not knock on the door or ask for permission. Within 5 short minutes, the Porsche was strapped down securely and hauled away, leaving nothing but a faint tire mark on the asphalt. Marcus had spent years carefully cultivating an image of supreme wealth and untouchable status. He wanted the neighborhood to see him as a highly successful executive who drove a luxury car and lived in a beautiful colonial estate. In the span of a single afternoon, that entire illusion was violently dismantled in broad daylight. The neighbors who used to wave at him were now standing on their porches, watching his beloved sports car get repossessed, while a construction crew tore his supposed house to pieces. His reputation in that community was completely permanently eradicated. I thanked the security guard for the detailed update and disconnected the call. I was sitting on the plush carpet of my penthouse nursery, watching the twins practice crawling. The contrast between my peaceful reality and the chaotic destruction of his life was incredibly profound. I had warned him that draining $15,000 from our joint account would have severe consequences, but his narcissism blinded him to the danger. He assumed I would simply absorb the pain and cover his tracks, like I had always done in the past. He failed to realize that every asset he claimed to own was either stolen, heavily leveraged, or dependent on my financial stability. By severing my ties to his fraudulent ecosystem, I had pulled the linchpin out of his existence. The house was gone, the car was gone, his job was gone. His mother and his sister-in-law were locked in federal custody, awaiting trial. The trap was waiting for the final rat to crawl inside. I knew he was coming back. He had absolutely no other options left. His luxury European vacation had turned into a desperate nightmare of survival. He was broke, stranded, and undoubtedly furious. I checked the calendar on my phone. It was Friday morning. The final act was approaching rapidly, and I was absolutely ready for the grand finale to begin right now. Late Friday evening, the sky above Atlanta turned a deep shade of purple. I was sitting at my kitchen island reviewing the final legal documents David had sent over. My old cellular device was completely destroyed, but I still had access to my digital carrier portal through my secure laptop. I logged into the cloud server to see if the trapped rat had made any desperate moves. There was a single audio file waiting in the voicemail inbox. It was recorded just a few hours ago. I clicked play, and the sound of a crowded airport terminal filled my quiet penthouse. Marcus' voice came through the speakers loud and shaking with absolute fury. "Listen to me very carefully, Kiara." He spat into the phone, his voice laced with pure venom. "I do not know what kind of pathetic game you think you are playing, but it is officially over. I have been trying to reach my mother for 3 days, and her phone goes straight to voicemail. Chelsea office line is completely dead. My corporate cards are shut down, and the bank refuses to tell me anything over the phone. I had to sell my custom Rolex to a shady pawn shop in Milan just to afford 2 miserable coach tickets back to Atlanta." I could hear the automated boarding announcements in the background speaking Italian. Marcus was breathing heavily, clearly exhausted and completely unhinged. "Chloe is crying in the terminal and blaming me for this entire disaster." He continued, his voice rising in volume. "I am about to board a 10-hour flight, sitting in the middle seat of the economy cabin next to a crying toddler. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is for a man of my status? I am a vice president. I am supposed to be flying first class drinking champagne. When I land, I'm taking an Uber straight to the house. You better have my Porsche parked in the driveway, and you better have a damn good explanation for why you messed with my bank accounts." He paused for a second to catch his breath. The sheer entitlement in his voice was staggering. "If you changed the locks, I am kicking the front door down," he threatened aggressively. "That is my house. I make the rules. I am the man of the family. You are going to pack your bags, and you are going to leave the twins with me. You are completely, entirely finished, Kiara. I am going to call my lawyers the second I land, and I am going to take everything you have. You are going to be on the street with absolutely nothing. Be ready." The voicemail ended with a sharp click. The audio file stopped playing, and the penthouse returned to a peaceful silence. I sat there staring at the digital file on my screen. He really believed he still had power. He actually thought he was flying home to his luxury car, his elegant house, and his high-paying corporate job. He had absolutely no idea that he was a wanted fugitive boarding a flight that would land him directly in the center of a federal nightmare. He had sold his expensive watch just to fly home to his own destruction. It was the ultimate poetic justice. I opened a new text message application I had installed on my secure laptop. I entered his phone number. He was probably sitting on the tarmac waiting for the plane to take off, desperately staring at his screen, hoping his threats had intimidated me into submission. He wanted me to be afraid. He wanted me to beg for forgiveness before he even touched down on American soil. I did not write a long paragraph explaining the federal indictments. I did not mention the repossession of his precious sports car or the absolute demolition of the colonial house. I did not tell him that his mother was sleeping on a concrete cot in a federal holding facility wearing a bright orange jumpsuit. I wanted him to discover every single piece of his ruined life all by himself. I wanted the shock to be complete and total. I typed a single word into the message box. Okay. I hit send. The delivery receipt illuminated on the screen, confirming the message had successfully reached his phone right before he lost cellular service over the Atlantic Ocean. That single word was all he needed to ruminate on for the next 10 hours. It was not a surrender. It was an invitation to walk directly into the trap. I closed the laptop and pushed my chair back from the island. The final pieces of the board were set. Victor construction crew was not working over the weekend, which meant the gutted house would be completely abandoned when Marcus arrived. The new locks were secure on the plywood door. The trap was absolutely flawless. I poured myself a glass of expensive red wine and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows. I looked out at the glowing city lights. Tomorrow morning, Marcus Davis would land in Atlanta. And tomorrow morning, Marcus Davis would lose his mind. Saturday morning broke with a heavy, humid heat over the city of Atlanta. At the International Arrivals Terminal, Marcus Davis walked through the sliding glass doors, looking like a complete shadow of his former self. His custom linen suit was violently wrinkled and stained with coffee from sitting in a cramped middle seat for 10 agonizing hours. He had a dark shadow of stubble on his jaw, and his eyes were bloodshot with pure, unadulterated rage. Walking a few steps behind him was Chloe, dragging her heavy designer luggage and loudly complaining about her swollen ankles. Marcus ignored her. He was hyper-focused on getting to his house and unleashing hell on his wife. He flagged down a standard yellow taxicab, since his luxury ride-sharing applications were completely locked. He pulled a wad of euro conversion cash from his pocket, the last remaining funds from the Rolex he had sold to a pawn shop in Milan. He shoved the money at the driver and barked out his home address. During the 40-minute drive through the city traffic, Marcus practically vibrated with anger. He had spent the entire flight convincing himself that Kiara was just throwing a massive hormonal tantrum. He believed she had somehow temporarily frozen his accounts by reporting his cards stolen, and he was fully prepared to kick her out of the house the second he walked through the front door. He was the man of the house. He was the breadwinner. He was going to assert his dominance and remind her exactly who was in charge. The taxi turned into his affluent neighborhood and rolled slowly down the familiar tree-lined street. Marcus leaned forward, peering through the dirty window, expecting to see his pristine colonial estate and his beloved silver Porsche parked in the driveway. Instead, the taxi came to a sudden halt in front of what looked like an active disaster zone. Marcus stepped out of the cab, and his expensive leather shoes instantly sank into a thick layer of mud on the lawn. He stared in absolute disbelief at the massive industrial dumpster blocking the driveway. The beautiful landscaping Brenda had paid thousands of dollars to install was completely shredded by the heavy tread marks of construction machinery. And worst of all, his silver Porsche was nowhere to be seen. The driveway was entirely empty, except for the towering pile of shattered drywall and broken copper pipes sitting in the dumpster. "What the hell is going on?" Chloe whined, stepping out of the taxi and looking at the ruined property in horror. "Is this the right house, Marcus? It looks like a garbage dump." Marcus did not answer her. A terrifying realization began to form in his mind, but his extreme arrogance violently pushed it away. He assumed Kiara had hired contractors to remodel the house without his permission just to spite him. He assumed she had hidden his sports car in the garage to punish him for leaving. He marched up the front steps, his face twisting into a mask of pure fury. He reached the front porch and stopped dead in his tracks. The beautiful custom oak front door he had bragged about was completely gone. In its place was a cheap splintered slab of plywood secured to the doorframe by heavy steel hinges and a thick metal padlock. A temporary commercial door handle was bolted to the center. Marcus frantically pulled his house key from his pocket and jammed it into the temporary lock. It did not even slide halfway in. The lock was entirely different. "Kiara!" he screamed at the top of his lungs, pounding his fists violently against the rough plywood. "Open this damn door right now! I swear to God, Kiara, you have crossed the line. Open the door!" He kicked the plywood with his heavy leather shoe, screaming her name over and over again. Inside the house, he could hear the sound of heavy boots walking across the bare wooden floorboards. The padlock rattled, and the temporary door handle clicked open. The heavy plywood door swung outward. But it was not Kiara standing there. A massive burly man wearing a yellow hard hat, a high-visibility construction vest, and steel-toed boots looked down at Marcus with an expression of profound annoyance. The man was covered in a thick layer of white drywall dust, and he was casually holding a heavy metal crowbar in his right hand. "Can I help you, buddy?" the construction foreman asked, his deep voice rumbling like a truck engine. "You are trespassing on an active demolition site and making a whole lot of unnecessary noise." "What are you doing in my house?" Marcus demanded, his voice cracking with panic as he tried to push past the massive man. "Where is my wife? Where is Kiara? Get out of my way before I call the police." The foreman did not move a single inch. He actually let out a loud, booming laugh. "Call the police, buddy. Go right ahead. Because nobody named Kiara lives here, and this sure as hell is not your house. My boss, Victor, bought this property for straight cash on Friday morning. The previous owner packed up and handed over the deed. Now back up off my porch before I have you arrested for trespassing." Marcus stumbled backward as if the massive construction foreman had physically punched him in the chest. He looked past the burly man into the gutted hallway of what used to be his luxurious colonial home. The custom chandelier was gone. The imported hardwood floors were ripped down to the subfloor. "Bought it?" he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "That is impossible. My name is on the mortgage. She cannot legally sell this house without my signature." The foreman let out a loud snort, adjusting his heavy tool belt. "Look, buddy, I do not know what kind of scam you are trying to pull, but the title company cleared this deed on Thursday afternoon. The only name on the original property deed was Kiara Davis. My boss wired her the cash and she handed over the keys. If you have a problem with your wife, I suggest you take it up with her in divorce court. Now get off this property before I call the cops." The foreman slammed the heavy plywood door shut, locking the steel padlock from the inside. Marcus stood frozen on the porch, the humid Atlanta heat suddenly feeling like a suffocating blanket. Chloe grabbed his arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his ruined linen suit. "Marcus, what is he talking about?" she shrieked, her voice echoing down the quiet street. "You told me you owned this house. You told me you were a millionaire. Where are we supposed to sleep tonight?" "Shut up, Chloe!" Marcus snapped, his panic finally boiling over into raw, explosive anger. He ripped his arm away from her grasp and stumbled down the porch steps, his expensive shoes sinking deeper into the muddy lawn. He pulled his cell phone from his pocket, his hands shaking so violently he almost dropped it. He dialed my new secure number, the one I had just activated and emailed to his phone moments before he landed. To his absolute shock, the line did not go to voicemail. It rang twice and then connected. "What the hell did you do?" Kiara Marcus screamed into the receiver, not even waiting for me to say hello. He hit the speakerphone button, holding the device out so Chloe could hear every word. "I am standing outside the house and there is a construction crew tearing it apart. Some guy just told me you sold the property. Tell me this is a sick joke right now." A soft, genuine laugh floated through the phone speaker. It was not the sound of the exhausted, defeated woman he had left behind a month ago. It was the sound of a woman who had completely won. "It is not a joke, Marcus," I replied, my voice perfectly calm and crystal clear. "I sold the house to a corporate liquidator on Friday morning. I took a slight loss on the market value, but the immediate cash wire was absolutely worth it. The money is sitting safely in a private account under my name only. You cannot do that!" He roared, his face turning purple with rage. "That is my house. You stole my equity. I will sue you for every single penny. I will drag you through court until you have nothing left." I leaned back on the plush velvet sofa in my secure penthouse, taking a slow sip of my hot cappuccino. "You cannot sue me for selling an asset that I legally owned prior to our marriage, Marcus," I explained patiently. "But let us talk about that equity you mentioned. I am referring to the $200,000 home equity line of credit you took out a month ago. The one where you and your sister-in-law Chelsea forged my signature and stamped it with a fraudulent notary seal while I was in the hospital delivering your children." Marcus went completely rigid. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost standing in the middle of a muddy driveway. Chloe gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. When a property is sold for cash, any secondary fraudulent debt tied to it does not transfer to the new buyer. I continued delivering the final financial blow. The debt defaults entirely to the individual who originated the fraudulent loan. That means you do not own a house anymore, Marcus. You just own a $200,000 debt to a federal bank. And since you used that stolen money to buy designer clothes and fund a European vacation for your mistress, you have absolutely no way to pay it back. He stared at the phone, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his ruin. "My Portia," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Where is my car, Kiara?" "Your car bounced a payment because your accounts were flagged," I stated. "Your car bounced a payment because your accounts were flagged," I stated. When you steal $500,000 from your corporate employer, they tend to notify the federal authorities immediately without asking any questions at all. The Federal Bureau of Investigation raided your corporate office building on Monday morning, Marcus. You do not have a prestigious corporate job anymore. You currently have a massive federal warrant issued for your immediate arrest." He let out a loud, choked gasp, leaning heavily against the side of the idling yellow taxicab. His weak knees buckled slightly, and he slowly slid down until he was sitting flat on the muddy curb. Chloe stood directly over him, her eyes wide with mounting terror and absolute confusion. "Oh, what about my mother, Brenda?" he asked, his voice sounding incredibly small and completely defeated. "She has money. She will hire the best lawyers in the city to fix this." I laughed softly, shaking my head even though he could not see me. "Your mother cannot help you, Marcus," I said. "Brenda is currently dealing with her own federal indictments. The Internal Revenue Service raided her church barbecue last Sunday. They seized all her domestic accounts and froze her offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. She was arrested for tax evasion and stealing charitable donations from her own congregation. I believe she is currently waiting for her arraignment hearing." "No," he moaned, burying his face in his hands. "No, that cannot be true. Chelsea. What about Chelsea? She is a licensed real estate broker. She knows people." "Chelsea is out on bail right now," I explained calmly. "She was arrested at the exact same barbecue. Her notary commission is permanently revoked, and her real estate license is suspended. She is facing 20 years in federal prison for forging the legal documents you used to steal my home equity. Your entire family is dismantled, Marcus. There is nobody left to save you." Chloe grabbed the phone from his hand, staring at the screen as if it were a venomous snake. "Is this true?" she demanded, her voice shrill and shaking. "Is he really completely broke? Is he going to prison?" "He is absolutely going to prison, Chloe," I replied, addressing the young mistress directly. "And considering you accepted thousands of dollars in stolen kickbacks through a fake shell company, you should probably start looking for a very good defense attorney yourself. Your corporate email was included in the federal evidence packet I submitted." Chloe dropped the phone onto the muddy grass. She looked at Marcus, who was sitting on the curb, sobbing uncontrollably into his hands. His expensive suit was ruined. His arrogance was entirely gone. He was nothing but a broken criminal sitting in front of a demolished house he no longer owned. Chloe did not hesitate for a single second. She turned around and marched right back to the yellow taxicab. She threw the back door open and climbed inside, slamming it shut behind her. "Wait, Chloe!" Marcus yelled, scrambling to his feet. "Where are you going? You cannot leave me here. I do not have any money to pay the driver. I do not have anywhere to go." "Drive." Chloe ordered the taxi driver, locking the doors from the inside. "I am not going to prison for this loser. Take me to the airport right now." The taxi driver put the car in gear and sped away down the tree-lined street, leaving Marcus standing completely alone in the mud. He chased after the car for a few steps, waving his arms frantically before his legs gave out again. He collapsed onto the grass, breathing heavily and staring up at the humid Atlanta sky. I listened to the sound of the taxi speeding away through the open phone line. The silence that followed was incredibly satisfying. He had abandoned me and his newborn children to fly off to Europe with his mistress. Now his mistress had abandoned him in the exact same neighborhood where he thought he was the king. "Kiara," he cried out, crawling over to where the phone lay in the grass. "Please, Kiara. You have to help me. I am your husband. I am the father of your children. You have the cash from the house sale. You can pay for my lawyers. You can fix this. I am so sorry for everything. I will do whatever you want." I looked around my beautiful, peaceful penthouse. The twins were napping in their pristine nursery. The sun was shining brightly through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. My life was completely perfect. "I am not your wife anymore, Marcus," I said, my voice cold and absolute. "I am just the forensic accountant who audited your miserable life and shut down your empire." I tapped the red button on my screen and permanently severed the connection. The line went completely dead. Marcus was left kneeling in the wet grass of a property he had fraudulently leveraged, staring at a phone screen that would never light up with my name again. But his isolation was only temporary. I had tracked his flight itinerary earlier that morning and anonymously forwarded his arrival time and expected destination to the lead federal investigator. I knew exactly what was about to happen next. Through the open window of my penthouse, I could not hear the sirens yet, but I knew they were already weaving through the heavy Atlanta traffic. Back at the muddy driveway, Marcus barely had time to wipe the dirt off his ruined linen suit before the flashing blue and red lights reflected off the sides of the industrial construction dumpster. Two black federal sport utility vehicles and a marked local police cruiser aggressively blocked the street, cutting off any possible escape route. The heavy doors flew open and a highly coordinated team of armed law enforcement officers stepped out into the humid air. They were accompanied by two men wearing sharp gray suits, holding thick leather briefcases. These were the external corporate auditors from his former software firm, the very men he had so desperately tried to avoid by fleeing to Europe. Marcus froze completely, his breathing shallow and rapid. He raised his hands instinctively, dropping his cell phone into the mud. The lead federal agent who had arrested his mother just a week prior marched straight up the driveway with his gold badge held high. Marcus Davis, the agent, announced, his voice echoing down the quiet, affluent street. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and fleeing the jurisdiction to avoid prosecution. Place your hands behind your back immediately." Marcus did not fight. He was too broken, too exhausted, and too terrified to mount any kind of resistance. He slowly turned around and let the heavy steel handcuffs clamp tightly around his wrists. He tried to negotiate, his voice cracking with pathetic desperation. He looked past the federal agents directly at the corporate auditors, begging them to understand his fabricated reality. "I can pay the company back," he pleaded, completely ignoring the Miranda rights being read to him. "Just give me a few weeks to liquidate my remaining assets. I have the house, I have the sports car. We can make a deal and settle this quietly without the courts." The lead auditor simply shook his head, pulling a folded legal document from his briefcase. "You do not own any assets, Mr. Davis," the auditor replied, his tone icy and professional. "We have already been fully briefed by your wife and her legal counsel." The house was legally sold to a corporate liquidator, the car was repossessed by the dealership, and the stolen funds are completely gone. You have absolutely nothing left to bargain with. The neighborhood that Marcus had tried so hard to impress was now actively watching his absolute downfall. Front doors opened, and former friends stepped out onto their porches, holding their morning coffees, whispering and pointing as the supposedly successful vice president was searched and restrained. There was no dignity left. His carefully constructed facade of wealth and superiority was completely obliterated in broad daylight. The police cruiser doors slammed shut, trapping him inside a nightmare of his own making. Miles away, high above the chaos and the sirens, I closed my laptop and let out a long, slow breath. The heavy knot of anxiety that had lived in my chest for the past year dissolved entirely. The toxic syndicate was dismantled. Brenda was facing years in a federal penitentiary for tax evasion. Chelsea was permanently stripped of her professional licenses and awaiting trial for forgery. Marcus was currently sitting in the back of a police car with absolutely no money, no assets, and no future. Justice was not just served, it was meticulously calculated and flawlessly executed. I stood up from the marble kitchen island and walked quietly into the nursery. Maria the nanny was gently rocking Mia while Leo slept peacefully in his crib. They were safe. They would never know the manipulation and the gaslighting that their father and his family had tried to normalize. They would grow up in a home filled with genuine love, massive financial security, and absolute peace. The late afternoon sun was beginning to lower, dipping toward the Atlanta skyline. I poured myself a fresh glass of sparkling water and stepped out onto the expansive private balcony. The warm breeze caught my hair as I looked out over the sprawling city. I thought about the exhausted, terrified woman sitting in that hospital bed a month ago, crying while her husband abandoned her. That woman felt so incredibly far away now. She had been replaced by a fierce, analytical protector who refused to be a victim. They had severely underestimated the quiet daughter-in-law. They mistook my kindness for weakness and my postpartum exhaustion for stupidity. They thought they could steal my home, my money, and my dignity without a single consequence. But money always leaves a trail, and I was the best auditor in the business. I took a sip of my water, watching the sky turn brilliant shades of orange and pink. The trap had snapped completely shut. I had my children, my wealth, and my freedom. It was the perfect end to their reign of terror, and the beautiful beginning of my ultimate victory. The story we just concluded is a thrilling ride of righteous vindication, but its most profound lesson is deeply grounded in reality. Never mistake kindness, silence, or temporary vulnerability for weakness. Marcus, Brenda, and Chelsea viewed Kiara's postpartum exhaustion not with empathy, but as an opportunity for exploitation. They relied on arrogant assumptions, believing that a quiet, overwhelmed new mother could be easily manipulated, gaslit, and financially drained. However, they entirely failed to recognize that the primal instinct to protect one's children does not diminish a person's intellect. It sharpens it to a razor's edge. In the real world, manipulators often target those they perceive as powerless or distracted. Yet true power rarely needs to announce itself loudly. Sometimes it quietly gathers receipts, encrypts hard drives, and methodically builds an impenetrable case. Kiara's journey teaches us that our professional skills, intellect, and intuition are invaluable assets that do not disappear during our most vulnerable seasons. She refused to internalize the toxic narrative her in-laws projected onto her. Instead, she leaned into her expertise as an auditor to dismantle their deceit piece by piece. This narrative serves as a stark reminder of the absolute necessity of financial independence and meticulous self-protection within relationships. When we maintain control over our own assets and refuse to turn a blind eye to red flags, we strip toxic individuals of their leverage. You do not have to be loud to be formidable. You just have to be prepared, strategic, and relentlessly protective of your own peace. Take inventory of your own financial and legal boundaries today. to ensure no one can ever leverage your livelihood against you.